Mr. Speaker.
Order. Questions for oral answer. Associate Professor Dr. Chashilu.
Mr. Speaker, with your permission, may I take the first three questions together?
Yes, please.
Thank you. Sir, the error in the means testing system occurred in the computerized means test system that calculates the healthcare subsidy tiers which individuals are eligible for, based on their income information. This central system is owned by MOH and managed by our vendor NCS Private Limited. On 16 September 2018, the system was migrated to a new government data center due to the government's planned decommissioning of the old data center where the system was originally located. One of the files uploaded by NCS to the servers during the migration was of a wrong version. As a result, healthcare subsidy tiers of some individuals were computed without the corresponding full income information of that individual. The first run of CHAS means tests after the system migration took place on 18 September. The first discrepancy in means test results was identified by the CHAS processing team on 24 September, and NCS was immediately alerted. The team then subsequently identified 5 more cases between 9th of October and the 2nd of November, and also alerted NCS on each occasion. 3 of the 6 cases were applications that required some manual verification from the CHAS processing team, who detected the discrepancies. The other 3 cases were appeals from CHAS applicants. 2 were assessed to be legitimate appeals for higher subsidies and were approved. The majority of the affected individuals received higher subsidies, and they do not need to return the subsidies disbursed. We estimate the amount to be about $2 million, and we're in discussions with NCS to recover the amount from them. Those who received lower subsidies will have the shortfall reimbursed, and their subsidies set back to the correct levels going forward. Dr. Chashilu and Associate Professor Walter Teixeira asked about the checks and audits on the system and the means test results. To ensure that the means test status and healthcare subsidy levels are updated, a refresh of an individual's data is automatically triggered every 2 years, or sooner, should an individual request for an updated means test or make an appeal. We agree with Dr. Chia that it is useful to inform CHAS beneficiaries of their subsidies at each deduction, so that they can also verify their subsidy levels and balances are accurate and updated. We plan to look into this during future rounds of system enhancements. As for the means test system, the regime of checks and audits are in line with the overall government IT policies. These cover areas such as software development, test management, systems resiliency, and cybersecurity. Audits are conducted regularly. Recent audits on the means test system include one by GovTech on IT management process compliance from July to October 2018, and another initiated by MOH on cybersecurity in August 2018. Where changes or enhancements are made to the system, MOH adheres to the quality assurance stipulated for government agencies. This would include requirements on software component testing, end-to-end system integration testing, user acceptance testing, performance tests, security tests, and also the production environment shakedown tests. For some systems, a set of transactions may also be performed at launch or migration to verify accuracy before going live. Additional monitoring may also be undertaken during the initial period of time after going live. The extent of testing in each case would depend on the assessed risk. The means test system concerned is a mature system that has been running since 2012. Based on the scope of this migration, the tests and validations were scoped and performed accordingly. Thereafter, the means test system was migrated to the new data center. Unfortunately, NCS deployed a wrong version of the software file to one of the servers in a new data center. In other words, the scope of the test and post-production validation was appropriate and in accordance with the project's assessed risk, but the wrong version of the file was thereafter used, instead of the one that had been tested, and that applied to one of the servers. Dr. Chia and also Associate Professor Teixeira also raised questions on outsourcing as against in-house development. To deliver digital solutions and deploy IT systems effectively, the government adopts a mix of IT development approaches, including outsourcing, co-sourcing, and also in-sourcing. If the solution is commercially mature, government agencies are more likely to outsource so as to better manage costs and leverage on the capacity, competency, and also the scale available in the market. Increasingly, government is also co-sourcing the development of critical systems with key vendors to ensure high systems quality and reliability, as well as interoperability across government. Finally, full in-house development is done to develop capability which enable us to develop software to better respond to our own evolving policies and requirements. In public healthcare, we take a similar approach. This allows us to move at the pace needed to support the volume of IT system requirements across the healthcare system, while ensuring that core capabilities continue to be developed internally. As we tap on technological solutions to raise productivity and improve the provision of healthcare services and support to Singaporeans, we are keenly aware that system vulnerabilities and risks exist, and they do have to be managed carefully. Where IT systems are outsourced to vendors, we also have to closely supervise their work, monitor their performance, and also manage vendor risks. We constantly seek to improve our quality assurance frameworks and review IT processes and outsourcing. Following this incident, MOH has started a review of our testing and deployment processes to identify areas that can be further strengthened. For example, we will be implementing an independent quality assurance review for every major system change henceforth. We will also look into automating some parts of our testing and deployment processes, including the detection of anomalous transaction outcomes. We will continue to learn from our experiences to build a stronger and more robust system. Thank you.
Associate Professor Daniel Goh.
Thank you, SMS. Two questions. The first one has to do with the scale of the error and the cost, because the error did not just happen for CHARS, but also affected, I think, outpatient subsidies, MediShield Life Premium subsidies, subsidies for intermediate and long-term care, and disability assistance schemes. So what is the scale of the error beyond CHARS, and what is the cost? And the second question is, if it affected these other subsidy schemes too, does it mean that the means testing data is so integrated that one error in one part would actually affect all the other parts with regards to a particular individual, for example, who is receiving subsidies across all these different schemes? Thank you.
In terms of the scale of the error and the remediation efforts that are taken and the cost that it would take, the 2 million that I estimated would approximate all of the costs that would be involved in correcting this error. In terms of the information that is to be affected, obviously income information for a particular individual would remain similar. So yes, if one aspect of the information is compromised, then it may affect the way in which that individual's subsidy tiers are calculated. The way in which we look at we compute and design the system for convenience is so that when there's a similar back end to all of these subsidy tierings, and each time a request is being made, one goes back to the base information for the particular individual. So to that extent, yes, Mr. Goh is right, but ultimately the integrity of the system also depends on the various cross-checks and the verifications that are done before the information is then put out. In this case, there was one particular file that affected the base information, which is why when computing the subsidy levels, the information was incomplete, and therefore the subsidy levels was wrongly assigned.
Associate Professor Walter Teixeira.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, SMS. I have three clarifying questions. First is that it appears from the timeline there was about 1.5 months elapsed between discovery of the first discrepancy and the conclusion it was a systematic error. So is it the case that the vendor did not conclude there was a need to check for whether there was a systematic error upon being notified of the very first discrepancy? That's the first question. The second question is it possible for the ministry to clarify today the extent of recoverability of costs from the vendor? And the last question is, will the decision to outsource this particular type of system, which is means testing, will that be reviewed in light of this case? Thank you.
In terms of the timeline, the timetable I gave you earlier takes into account the amount of time it took for the CHARS team to pick up the error, flag it to NCS, and within about 3 weeks or so, the error was fixed. What the vendor did not realize at that point in time was the fixing of that error meant that all cases moving forward would be correct, but it did not account for the fact that those that had been processed up to that point in time still had mismatched subsidy information. That error itself was then fixed a few weeks later. So from that time onwards, no other errors would occur. Between that time and when this was then announced, steps were taken to identify the scope of the persons who were involved, what amounts each of them were affected by, whether up or down, and the extent to which remediation would take place. And once that was determined, this was announced back in February, earlier this month. As far as the extent of the recovery is concerned, as I mentioned, that 2 million would cover an estimate of what it would cost to remediate this problem. Of course, as Professor Tissera appreciates, if we keep the subsidy levels and we honor the subsidy levels despite it being erroneous, there will continue to be a degree to which further subsidies that were higher than what is supposed to be might be granted. And so we are looking at all of this with the vendor and working out a sum that would approximate all of this and come to an arrangement with the vendor. On your last question, Walter, Professor Tissera, this system still remains the most convenient because it allows there to be one avenue where the information is contained and one source at which all of this would be determined when an applicant comes and makes an application for subsidy, whether it is CHARS or it's in long-term care or in some other subsidy schemes. So it remains the most efficient. And the best way in which this can be fixed and to ensure that this problem does not arise again is to really strengthen and make more resilient the way in which testing is done, either at the time migration takes place or at some stage thereafter to continue to monitor even after it goes live, as I mentioned earlier. Fixing the problem at its root requires these levels of resiliency to be improved, not so much to change the system architecture altogether.